To worship you, I live. To worship you, I live to worship you. To worship, to worship, to worship you, I live. To worship you, I live to worship you.
All right, good morning, everybody. I'm continuing this series about the foundations of our nation, and I want to ask a question today. Did you ever wonder what makes our nation work? I want you to think about this. What makes our nation work? How can this work? We've got 330 million people and all this stuff, and for the most part, it's been pretty peaceful. I mean, there's periods every now and again when something gets a little out of hand, but for the most part, it's pretty peaceful. And even when things get out of hand, it's usually a relatively small faction of the nation, and the rest of the nation is relatively peaceful. That's the general norm. So how does that happen, that we have such a peaceful nation, a nation that works so well? How does that work? I'm going to suggest why. It happens because of one institution that we have, called the courts. Why are the courts so important? The courts are important because at the end of the day, if you and I have a dispute, we can settle back in the confidence that we can go before a lawful judge and he will settle the dispute honorably for us. Now, I may not agree, I may disagree, but if I can get a fair, impartial hearing, I'm okay with that. And most people are okay with that. And you take away the courts, and what is then the remedy that remains? Well, there is a remedy. Dr. Wilson, with great wisdom, says none, but there is. It's brute force. It's might makes right, and that's when civilization breaks down. And so at the end of the day, what matters is that we have courts that uphold law. And when you take that away, it'll be very difficult to maintain a nation for any length of time. So I want to look at that for a little bit historically. I want to look at that from the perspective of our founders, and I want to look at that from the perspective of the Word of God. So if you go to 2 Chronicles chapter 19, I'm going to begin peeking at a few things, because this has been a very trying time in our nation, and the last 2 weeks have been particularly offensive to liberty, as I think you have seen and you'll see even more. And it's really very important, very powerful time to be awake instead of woke. I'll distinguish between the two. 2 Chronicles chapter 19, we're going to look at verse 5 through 7. And he set judges in the land throughout all the fenced cities of Judah, city by city. And he said to the judges, "Take heed what you do, for you judge not for man, but for the Lord, who is with you in the judgment. Wherefore, now let the fear of the Lord be upon you. Take heed and do it, for there is no iniquity with the Lord our God, nor respect of persons, nor taking of gifts." Translated loosely, you better be an honorable judge, because I'm an honorable God, and I don't give favor to one person over another. That's why we have the Lady Justice with the balance scale. You know, it's showing that the law is applied evenly, and she has a blindfold on. And there's a reason for that. It shows that there is no respecter of persons. Those symbols that are the identifying symbols of our institutions came from our founding fathers. That's why she's got a blindfold on, because of what you see here in 2 Chronicles. Because there's no respecter of persons. So important. So important. Now I'm going to tell you, I don't know that that's the case in too many courts today, but it's supposed to be. Let's go to Deuteronomy for a second, because Moses even warned his judges. Deuteronomy chapter 1. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Chapter 1. Or if you have an electronic Bible, just hit Deuteronomy 1. Let's look at verse 16 and 17. "And I charged your judges at that time, saying, Hear the causes between your brethren, and judge righteously between every man and his brother, and the stranger that is with him. You shall not respect persons in judgment, but you shall hear the small as well as the great. You shall not be afraid of the face of man, for the judgment is God's, and the cause is too hard, and the cause that is too hard for you, bring it to me, and I will hear it." Makes it very clear. Rely on God. Judgment Sitting in judges, the office of judges, that's a God thing. It's a God-ordained thing. Let's go to Nehemiah for a second, because he explains the problem that we have with the courts. Nehemiah chapter 9. Let's look at verse 34 through 37. Neither have our kings, our princes, our priests, nor our fathers kept your law, nor have they hearkened unto your commandments and your testimonies, wherewith you did testify against them. For they have not served you in their kingdom, and in your great goodness that you gave them, and in the large and fat land which you gave before them, neither turned they from their wicked works. Behold, we are servants to this day, and for the land that you gave unto our fathers to eat the fruit thereof and the good thereof, behold, we are servants in it. In other words, you gave us this land with fruit flowing with milk and honey. What in the world has happened that we're now the servants in this land? How did we go from being the masters to the slaves? Talking more about the land in verse 37, and it yields much increase unto the kings whom you have set over us because of our sins. And they have dominion over our bodies and over our cattle at their pleasure, and we are in great distress. What's the point of that last verse? He says, I've put kings over you, wicked kings, because you needed something to snap you out of the direction you were heading in. You needed something to bring you back to where you need to be. I want to look at what's going on right now in our nation. We talked about what was happening in Michigan a little while ago, and about 10,000 or more people showed up at the state capitol, and they jammed the streets for miles around protesting for Governor Gretchen to let the state open up and go back to work. And a bunch of people didn't stay in their cars. They got out and they protested at the Capitol, and many of them were armed, and it was quite the big notice nationally. Well, last week, a few days ago, armed protesters again appeared at the Capitol. This time, these gentlemen, as you can see, are ready for business. I don't know who they are. I'm sure they're very, very good men. I am sure they're honorable men, and they are probably former military, and they are ready for action. And I wouldn't doubt for 1 second that these are the guys you want to have with you in a gunfight. That's all. I don't know anything about the guys, but they're very serious-looking guys, and I'm sure they know how to use those weapons. And these guys, along with hundreds of other people, showed up again at Michigan State Capitol for another protest against the stay-at-home order. And why did that happen? Why did that happen? Let's go to a video. I want to take a look at what actually happened there. But keep in mind, there was a reason for that.
How did they come up with this number of 6 feet? I think they just pulled it out of their rear ends. Maybe it's 5. Maybe it's 3.5. Maybe it's 8. I don't know. But why 6?
So these protesters were not happy to stay outside. They went into the Capitol. They kind of forced their way into the Capitol. And what you saw there with the police, state police and the Capitol police standing guard there, they were trying to get into the legislative, to the legislature. They were trying to get into the House, into where the body meets. And they were, in the beginning, they were shouting, let us in, let us in. That's what they were saying. And so what prompted that? Now, before I get into all that, I want to compliment the protesters and the Michigan State Police and Capitol Police for everybody keeping their heads. I don't want to see anybody get shot. I don't want to see that kind of thing happen. I think the protesters went as far as they should have gone at this point, and I think the state police did a good job there, saying, no, you can't go into that, to the House of Representatives there. It's a little bit too far. And everyone was calm and respected each other, and, they get into shouting matches, and that was fine. I'm not saying that they should always stay out of the House of Representatives. I'm not saying they should or shouldn't. I'm just saying at this point, I think they made their point. It was well made. And every news organization in the world picked up the fact that men armed with what looked like M16s or AR-15s or whatever they were showed up there looking like they could take care of business if they needed to. And that has to send a little concern to legislators and to the governor. As well it should. That is why we have the Second Amendment. Okay, that's why it's there. I'm going to get into that a little bit. But what prompted this display this week? What prompted it was they had a court in Michigan that ruled that it was okay to keep people at home, that the government had the authority to order people to stay home, and that was not breaking any constitutionally guaranteed rights. Well, that's just not the case. When I was a kid, my brother and I we were normal kids. Yes, I was once a kid. Yep. And of course, as all kids, we used to drive Mom crazy. And whatever the situations were that we'd get in trouble for, I don't remember, I couldn't tell you what one of them was, but I do remember Mom's frequent response as she would listen to both of us. It was this: one lies and the other one swears to it. And I don't care what court says that it's constitutional, it is not constitutional. Period. We have a right to assemble. You do not have a right to stop it. Period. End discussion. I don't care if you think it's for our own good. It is not an authority you have. Period. End discussion. The Constitution is very, very, very explicitly clear about it. Now, I tell you this story because of what I'm explaining about the courts. They cannot okay tyranny. And if you get to a point where courts begin to okay tyrannical actions of government, be very careful, courts. Be very careful, judges. Be very careful, governors. Because there are plenty of people in this country who are armed and ready to do what they're supposed to do when that happens. Now, I pray that doesn't come to that. But I can't believe that we're watching what we're seeing happen here. If I told you 6 months ago that you'd have a government ordering everyone to stay home, telling you you couldn't go to church, telling you can't even go and visit your grandmother, telling you can't go outside without a mask, and you will tell you when you can work again, you'd say, that's ridiculous. That's not going to happen. This is the United States of America. And yet it has happened. And so at this moment, I will say because of their actions, all bets are off the table, and they'd better get the message. And I believe they are, and I believe that we will see things turn around. But I need to caution everybody that the courts have got to rule lawfully. And that court in Michigan did not rule lawfully. And they better be very careful, to be very, very careful, because the people in Michigan are no slouches. There's a very well-armed militia there who will take care of business if they have to. And I pray it doesn't come to that, because there's other things you can do. Plenty of things. For example, the good people of Michigan should already have a recall petition for that governor. They should also have a recall petition for the judge or judges who ruled that tyranny is okay. We have that authority. Get that petition going. To the people in Michigan, if you're watching this, get that petition going. You need to understand you have remedies long before we have a shooting match. If for no other reason, because the other side is very well armed, very well organized. You don't want to get in a shooting match with people who have ARVs and tanks and things like that they can roll down the streets. It's not the kind of thing we ever want to see, but it's a remedy that's there. And the people are making their point, and the governor should pay close attention. Pompous little arrogant thing that she is. Oh, I'm sorry, did I say that? Was that not a politically correct thing to say? Yeah, I can be guilty of that, I guess. But I want to tell you a little story that happened. I've been very involved with the legal community and the patriot community in the United States for better than 20 years, and our radio show's gone out throughout the country and even in 7 other countries. And there was a group, and I'm going to deliberately leave the location out of the story. I thought long and hard, should I say it or not, and I'm going to leave the case out. And there was a group of patriot-minded people who had me come, and we were working with them quite a bit. And, these guys were fighting speeding tickets and all kinds of things that you do when you realize that these are administrative laws and not real laws. And just there's a whole big science behind it I won't get into. And here's what happened. In one court, a judge would not allow people to take notes. Now, he does not have the authority to do that. He doesn't have the authority to do that. And he had done some other crazy things with a particular guy, just really treated him badly and imprisoned him and just all kinds of crazy things. Again, I'll leave it all out. But as we get into that whole thing, I was in the court one day and I watched. And some people were taking notes, and a bailiff came over and said, "You have to put that away. You can't take notes in this court." I'm like, "What? What are you talking about? I can't take notes." And they put them away. And I watched that. And I met with all the people. There was probably about 40 or 50 people in that group. I said, "You know what the real thing to do here is this. The real thing to do is to have a little plan ahead of time. And the plan should be have 70 or so people go to that court and take notes. And when the bailiffs come over and say, 'You can't take notes here in this court,' say, 'Get out of my face. I can take notes here. Get out of my face.' Be belligerent about it. Get out of my face." And they won't get out of your face because they think they're God. They think they can do whatever they want. And then begin to resist. And when you begin to resist, they will call their buddies to resist. And when their buddies come to resist, other people need to stand up and help them resist. And where will that go? They'll call more back up to resist. And nobody will be putting the papers away. And then they'll be resisting, and they'll call the state police to come. And in short order, you'll have a whole bunch of state police officers arresting people for what? Taking notes in court. Now, how could they make a real case out of that? Because taking notes is not a crime. What obligations do I have to a police officer if I have done nothing wrong? Zero. Zero. Please remember that. A police officer comes up to you and says, "Let me see your license, and let me see your license, let me see your ID, excuse me, let me see your ID." I'm sorry, for what? Because I want to see it. I'm sorry, did I commit a crime? No, I want to see it. You don't see anything, pal. And that's what you need to tell them. Get lost. And that's the truth. People today aren't programmed that way. They're like, "Oh, I better give it to them." Where did we get this from? Absolutely not. And so how would that have played out? Well, I told them they needed to do one more thing. They needed to make sure that none of them drove to the court that day, that they all get dropped off so that their cars weren't there. They also needed to make sure that none of them had their ID in their pockets or anything that would ID them. So now when they arrest the people, they need the cooperation of these people to identify themselves. And they simply say, every one of them, "What crime have I committed? I demand to be set free and walked from this facility." I'm not identifying myself. Now, at the same time, we needed to have somebody, see, they wouldn't allow cameras in that court either, or cell phones. But they have little things today with glasses that you can identify, that you can videotape things with. I said, so have somebody with those glasses on, just standing back in the corner, just sort of watching the whole thing. They just look like regular glasses, just watching the whole thing, getting the whole thing on tape. Have somebody outside in the van that's recording the whole thing. And when everybody gets arrested, make a few copies of that. Bring one to Fox News. Bring one to ABC. Bring one to CNN. Bring one to the governor's office. Say, "You might like to know this, but in such and such a location, a judge just arrested 70 people for taking notes in his courtroom." Now they've got a problem. And I can promise you this, that judge would have hell to pay. This is how we can exercise civil disobedience and regain rights that they are trying to take away. We don't simply let them take them away. And why is this important? It's important because once those rights are gone, they don't come back, not without a big fight, and they will always grab for more, and you'll see that today. But why is all of that important? Why is it important that we have a very limited government? Because they don't know what they're doing. And you can see the evidence of that all around. You are looking at a tremendous mess in the economy right now that we're just seeing the beginning of the mess in the economy. It will get drastically worse. Just watch. Why? Because these guys do not know how to manage an entire economy. I said this the last time. We're seeing what happens right now with a government-managed economy. And I want to show you how bad it is with this next slide here. I want you to understand, because there's a gentleman here who is a very storied investor here in the United States. His name is Warren Buffett. And Warren started Berkshire Hathaway, and he lost $50 billion. $50 billion so far this year. $50 billion. Do you know how much money that is? Do you know how many lifetimes people work to accumulate that kind of money? $50 billion. Now, mind you, that's not just his personal money. He invests for his investors in a group called Berkshire Hathaway. And he said this, well, actually, without going through the whole thing, he just said this. They're down $13,209 a share. So if you own Berkshire Hathaway stock, for every share you have, you just lost $13,200. Now, that sounds like a huge number. we look at stocks and pay attention a little bit, and we look at those $50 stocks and those $25 stocks, and we see a couple of expensive ones at $200 and $500, and like, wow, that's... Berkshire Hathaway stock today is trading at $273,000 a share. But it started out much smaller than that, and the company's grown and grown and grown. There's people who've stayed with him. They've all lost $13,000 a share. He's lost $50 billion. $50 billion. Noah Webster wrote the American Dictionary of the English language, and he defines a tyrant as this, and I've said this before: a monarch or other ruler or master who uses power to oppress his subjects, a person who exercises unlawful authority or lawful authority in an unlawful manner, one who by taxation, injustice or cruel punishment, or the demand of unreasonable services imposes burdens and hardships on those under his control, which law and humanity do not authorize, or which the purposes of government do not require. It's a despotic ruler, a cruel master, an oppressor. That's out of Webster's dictionary. Warren Buffett isn't the only person who's having some problems. I want you to take a look at another friend of mine. Ah, that it were so. That's Elon Musk. I love Elon Musk. I just think he's fantastic. And he gets a little controversial sometime, but he stepped out. Now his plant, his Tesla plant, is shuttered. It's in California. And he has called the coronavirus lockdowns fascists for depriving citizens of their constitutional rights. The only thing I would correct Mr. Musk on is their constitutionally guaranteed rights, their God-given rights. But I understand he doesn't understand that particular point. I want you to take a look at a video that he released this week during a meeting with his investors.
The extension of the shelter in place, or frankly I would call it forcibly imprisoning people in their homes against all their constitutional rights, that in my opinion, and breaking people's freedoms in ways that are horrible and wrong, and not why people came to America or built this country. This is a time to think about the future, and also to ask, is it right to infringe upon people's rights, as what is happening right now? I think the people are going to be very angry about this, and are very angry. It's like somebody should be. If somebody wants to stay in their house, that's great. They should be allowed to stay in their house, and they should not be compelled to leave. But to say that they cannot leave their house, and they will be arrested if they do, this is fascist. This is not democratic. This is not freedom.
Now, what's interesting about that is that he is, if I'm correct, from South Africa. And South Africa is not like the United States. And he quickly recognizes what's going on here. He quickly sees what's going on. He says, I came to this country to flee this stuff. What in the world is going on here? Why are you letting this happen? Go to the next slide, please, Jared. Because I like what he said. Rage against the dying of the light of consciousness. My friends, I want you all to wake up. Today there are 30 million people out of work. Today, May 2nd, 2020. 30 million people out of work. That is the greatest travesty that's ever happened here in this country at the hands of our government. And I don't care what excuses they have. We're going to take a look at how lame they are, how lame the excuses are, and why none of it is valid here before we're done. John Wingate Thornton encouraged Christians to oppose tyranny wherever it was found. Listen to what he said. Tyranny brings ignorance and brutality along with it. It degrades men from their just rank into the class of brutes. It damps their spirits. It suppresses arts. It extinguishes every spark of noble character and generosity in the breasts of those who are enslaved by it. It makes naturally strong and great minds feeble and little, and triumphs over the ruins of virtue and humanity. This is true of tyranny in every shape. There can be nothing great and good where its influence reaches, for which reason it becomes every friend of truth and humankind, every lover of God and the Christian religion, to bear a part in opposing this hateful monster called tyranny. Now, why do we have to oppose it? Look what just happened in Canada this week. They had a mass shooting there a couple weeks ago, and Comrade Justin Trudeau, Snowflake himself, just banned military-style assault weapons in that country. And the important thing you can see in the very bottom of that article is his question was this: tell me why this is necessary to shoot a deer. Well, I want to address that for a second. I'm not exactly sure of what the laws are in Canada regarding their founding. I know it's very similar to the United States, but I do know what they are here. And you hear politicians frequently say the same thing here. They say, well, what does a gun like that have to do with hunting a deer? And everybody says, well, I guess you don't need it to hunt a deer. Stop. That's not the question. The question isn't what does that do for hunting a deer. The question is, why do you even raise the question about deer? Because the Second Amendment has nothing to do with deer hunting. Nothing. It has to do with politician hunting. And those guns are very effective in politician hunting. I just want you to understand you've got to get the narrative correct. Deer hunting has nothing to do with the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment was there for one purpose: for the people to be well armed, to protect them from domestic enemies and foreign enemies. That's what the Second Amendment is for. We cannot let it be vilified. It's absolutely imperative that it not be vilified. Very, very important. If you let the Second Amendment if you let guns be vilified, all you're doing is welcoming tyranny to our nation. Understand that. Very, very important. One of the earliest textbooks of American history was written by a guy named Edward Johnson. And he actually went a step further with this concept. He said, neither will any Christian of sound judgment vote for anyone but such as people who earnestly contend for the faith. They understood how important Christianity was, how important our nation was to standing strong on the principles of the gospel. And if you look all over the place, you see the principles of the gospel all over our laws, all over our nation. This week, the president did something very good. I want to go to the next slide, please. Congress wants to bring Dr. Anthony Fauci to testify before a House committee. And the House of Representatives, Adam Schiff, Mrs. Pelosi, those people are already talking about having a hearing. They want to know what the president was doing, and they want to start to have hearings about everything here. And the president stood on his executive authorities and said, yeah, Dr. Fauci's not testifying anyplace. Thank you. And he used a good explanation. He said that, well, we're in the middle of a thing and we need his full attention here. He doesn't need to be distracted with that. But the reality is he recognizes that I have the authority to shut these guys down and I'm going to do it. And so kudos to him for doing it and not being afraid of anything at all. You know, even the Declaration of Independence, I've shared this with you before, I will repeat it again. Even the Declaration of Independence urges us all to throw off despotic government. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. And that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. And that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new governments. And then it goes on, and at the very end it says, after a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object, meaning freedom and liberty, taking it away from you, it evidences a design to reduce us under absolute despotism. It is the right of the people, it is the duty of the people to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. I want you to understand that in our founding documents, they made it clear that if it ever gets to a point where government becomes tyrannical, then you have an obligation to throw them out and do something different. We have an obligation for that. And I want to tell you that in the last 2 weeks, government has become tyrannical. Governors every place are grabbing authority that they do not have, making declarations that they do not have. And I want to explain this for a second. Because when a government says, I want you to see this for a minute. It's a legal point, but you'll catch it very quickly. When a government says everyone has to stay home, you cannot work, they can't do that. And they can't do it because we have the right to assemble. They can't do it because the Supreme Court has upheld something. They have upheld that property cannot be taken without due process. Well, Pastor, what are you talking about? Well, your labor is your property. And the Supreme Court has upheld that. In a case called Butchers Union Company, we have a next slide on that, please. Butchers Union Company versus Crescent City Company. The United States Supreme Court said this: among these unalienable rights, as proclaimed in the Declaration of Independence, is the right of men to pursue their happiness, by which is meant the right to any lawful business or vocation in any manner not inconsistent with the rights of others. So they said, in order to have happiness, that absolutely means you have a right to work in any lawful enterprise, which may increase your prosperity or develop your faculties, so as to give them the highest enjoyment. So they understood and made it very clear that your right to work is your property and it can never be taken away from you. And then because you need that to be happy. You can't be happy without it. And then it said this: it has been well said that the property which every man has is his own labor. So the Supreme Court said it is absolutely correct, abundantly correct, that you say your property is your labor. Why? Because it is the original foundation of all other property. You can't have property if you don't go out and work for it. Correct? You have to get a job, you have to work hard so you can save money, so you can buy a car, so you can buy food, so you can buy pans to cook your food in the refrigerator to keep the food from spoiling. Save up money so you can build a house. You don't want to work? Fine. You're going to live on some land? Wonderful. You need your labor to cut down the trees and make your log cabin, and then go hunting and plant a garden. It has been well said, the property which every man has is his own labor. It is the original foundation of all other property, and so it is the most sacred and inviolable, cannot be violated. Well, they've done that. The governors have done that. They have done that. It's not a question of if they ever become tyrannical. I'm telling you today, they have become tyrannical. And now what are you going to do about it? In 1774, the Provincial Congress of Massachusetts publicly promoted resistance to tyranny as a duty. Listen to what they said. Resistance to tyranny becomes the Christian and social duty of each individual. Continue steadfast and with a proper sense of your dependence on God, nobly defend those rights which heaven gave you, and no man ought to take from us. Very important to understand this. Now, these people are waging a fear campaign. And they're telling you, be very afraid, this is a horrible thing, it's killing everybody. But the realities are very, very different. I'm not saying there's not a virus. I'm not saying there isn't a problem. I do have questions of its origin, but that's a different story. It's here now, we have to deal with it. But they're making it out to be this kill everybody thing that everyone must be protected from. I want to take a look at a gentleman named Dr. Levitan. And Dr. Levitan is from New Hampshire, and he volunteered at a hospital in New York City. He's a well-seasoned, well-educated doctor, and he noticed something. Let's look at this video.
A New Hampshire emergency room doctor with 3 decades of experience is sharing what he learned about treating coronavirus patients with potentially dangerous cases of pneumonia. In a New York Times op-ed, Dr. Richard Levitan described his 10 days volunteering last month at New York's Bellevue Hospital. He wrote about the simple technology that he believes could save lives. We spoke with Dr. Levitan yesterday, who told me he was very surprised by what he saw in the ER.
People were sick for days, and then they only came in with shortness of breath, like the day they presented. And they would arrive with oxygen levels that basically were incredible to us. I mean, almost unimaginable how people could be awake and alert and have oxygen levels that are half normal. You know, normally we are 94 to 100% on these devices, these pulse oximeters. that measure how much oxygen we have in our blood. And people were showing up with oxygen levels of 50%. Now, this matches the level of oxygen that we've measured on the summit of Mount Everest.
Wow.
And it's amazing to me that patients could be sick for days, getting sicker, not realizing it.
So they had these very low oxygen levels, but they had no sensation of, I can't breathe. Is that the point?
Yeah.
You're making?
Exactly.
You were surprised that some of them were still talking on cell phones. Why is that significant?
You know, what is amazing to me with this disease is people's brains are working fine. Their oxygen levels have gone down to scary low levels, but it has happened slow enough that their body has accommodated it. So they are not like every other patient we see with serious lung disease. But what I'm saying is this disease kills by silent hypoxia, and patients should understand that shortness of breath is a late sign.
Hypoxia is what exactly?
Is low oxygen.
And the reason why it's so important to get this early warning is because it could avoid you being on a ventilator and having to be intubated, right?
Absolutely. So, you know, we think this pneumonia basically has two phases. This silent hypoxia period where the oxygen's drifting down, but you feel okay. And then the second part of this disease, the part of this disease that kills, is when all of a sudden your lungs get stiff, carbon dioxide finally starts to build up, you begin to feel short of breath, and those patients are the patients who are presenting with COVID pneumonia.
All right, that's important. That's very powerful. So he's seen an early detection thing that no one's talked about yet. Very experienced doctor. I'm going to come back to that in a second. I want to listen to two doctors, and they did about an hour interview. The two doctors from California, and it was such a great interview, but I just clipped a small piece. I want you to hear a couple minutes of what this doctor had to say. This is Dr. Erickson.
Talk to ER doctors who have no ulterior motive. They have the same viewpoint. There's a post today from a doctor from Wisconsin. I encourage you all to read it. I'll share his story with you. It is exactly what we're saying. And he eloquently displays, he's an ER doctor. He says, I'm walking into this war zone. Our ICUs are empty. I'm scared to go to my own place of work. There's no patients, but we have people in hazmat suits checking my temperature as I walk through the doors. He's like, something else is going on here. This is not about science, and it's not even about COVID. When they use the word safe, if you listen to the word safe, that's about controlling you. So when I talk to all my ER doctors who work in a hospital, no stake in the game, same opinion. That's how I'll answer your question. We all have the same opinion.
We're presenting the medical data here. I mean, what I think about politics is irrelevant. We're presenting the medical data.
We need to stay on things that we can answer intelligently, which is not why does a CEO of some hospital in Wisconsin do that. We need to stay on the topic of, do we need to shelter in place, and does that make sense from the microbiology knowledge we've known for 30 years? The sciences haven't changed. We live our life in the life sciences. Biology, biochemistry, microbiology. So everything that you're asking us goes against that sheet of information. Why people do things at a hospital is not really our area of expertise. So from what we're seeing right now, it's time to open back up. The science says it is. The models we have been using from predictions to predict the amount of disease are not accurate. This information is accurate. It models the flu. Let's go back to work. That's what the data is saying. Not models. Data is saying that.
So these guys, in their hour, presented all the facts, all the data, showing how many people have been exposed, what their actual test rate results are showing now, and it's massive amounts of people have been exposed, which means that the death rate is way more minuscule than they ever thought. And he's like, this is really having results very similar to a flu. And someone said, well, isn't that because of social distancing and everyone staying at home? And he made it clear that's not what it's because of at all. And this is something very different in what's really going on here. And so a new drug was, not a new drug, but a new use for an existing drug was discovered, and it's called remdesivir. And remdesivir is a drug that was developed relatively recently to treat Ebola. Now, why is it being effective? Remdesivir has either a protein or an enzyme inhibitor in it. I'm not sure which it is, because the Ebola and coronaviruses, they latch onto that protein or whatever it is, and that gives them the ability to rapidly expand throughout the body. And this inhibits that, doesn't allow that to happen. It either blocks it, kills it, or stops it from interacting, however it works. And what they have found is that remdesivir, given with the early symptoms, does an amazing job to keep people from getting the virus. And again, we have a drug that's been around for a while, not unlike hydroxychloroquine, which when mixed with zinc, a high zinc thing, and one other thing, erythromycin, thank you, is this cocktail that's given to people that's taking people who are stage 4 kind of critical and getting them better in a matter of hours. And and they go home and continue to convalesce. And it's working out miraculously, but of course the powers that be don't own the patents on any of those, so they keep trying to downplay them. But the tests that are coming out, they're saying the anecdotal stories, but they're more than anecdotal stories, because now it's been going on for a while. Now we have quantifiable results that we can use throughout the population. They're showing that these things work very well. And when you mix that with what Dr. Levitan showed in the beginning about the oxygen levels, well, they make a little thing called an oximeter, which just clips on the end of your finger, and you can buy them at Walmart for anywhere from $20 to $50. Any drugstore has them. They're not expensive, and it measures your pulse and your oxygen level. And so anybody could kind of keep track of their oxygen level, because he made a good point. People don't even recognize they're getting sick because their oxygen levels are dropping, and then it gets critical. So if you're monitoring your oxygen level with this little $15, $20 item, and you could go to the doctor and get a little dose of remdesivir to stop it from coming out, that's going to stop this thing completely. And if it got out of control a little bit, they've got the other drugs that we just talked about with hydroxychloroquine. And so I want you to understand, this is not what it's being presented to be. Please understand that. And this doctor, Dr. Erickson, who was sitting there, he made a very good point. He said, what is this about? Something else is going on here. What is this something else that's going on? And he even said it. When you hear safety, this is all about control. And that's all this is about. I've said that from the very beginning. This is not real. Oh, there's not a real virus? Yeah, there's a real virus. But no, it is not what they say it is. And this is all fear, all hype, 24/7. That's all this is. And I haven't bought it from the beginning, and I know a lot of you haven't. And I think people are more and more waking up. Even let's look at what the World Health Organization says here. And I'm not a fan of theirs whatsoever. But the World Health Organization even says that masks are useless. And so now, based on zero science, you have governors in the state of New York and other places mandating that you have to wear a mask. I'm not wearing a mask. I refuse to wear a mask. We'll give you a $1,000 fine. Great, injure me, go ahead. I have now grounds to bring you to court. I will not wear a mask. Period. You have to understand what's happening here. What is really going on? And then they say, well, this big emergency is here, and we can't have people gathering at all, so we're going to do something with the election. We're going to make it safe. There's that word again, safe. We're going to make it safe for you. So we're going to have everybody mail in the ballots. It's okay. You can trust us. We're the government. I want you to look at what happened the last time. They did a mail-in ballot thing. 28 million ballots became missing in the last 4 elections. 28 million ballots? That's a lot of votes. Between 2012 and 2018, 28.3 million mail-in ballots remain unaccounted for, according to the Federal Election Assistance Commission. The missing ballots amount to nearly 1 in 5 of all absentee ballots and ballots mailed to voters residing in states that do elections exclusively by mail. States and local authorities simply have no idea what happened to these ballots since they were mailed. A significant increase in mail-in voting this fall could greatly incentivize what's called ballot harvesting, where third parties collect mail-in ballots on behalf of voters and deliver them to election officials. Yeah, what could ever go wrong with that? There has long been a consensus that such practice incentivizes fraud, and ballot harvesting is illegal in most of the country. Public debate over the issue has intensified in recent years after a GOP operative in North Carolina was indicted for crimes related to ballot harvesting. That same election cycle, California legalized ballot harvesting. Observers say the practice played a key role in ousting several Republican congressmen in Orange County in 2018, which has forever been a long-standing GOP stronghold. And now it's inhabited by all these liberals. Now, I talked about it at the time. We talked about it on our radio show at the time. They were criminally stealing that election. Why is that important? Because that changed the House of Representatives. That's why you have Nancy Pelosi now sitting as the Speaker of the House. That's why you had this multi-bazillion-dollar Russia scam going on. That's why you had this multi-bazillion-dollar waste of time with the impeachment hearing that they were all focused on, instead of paying attention to, hey, something's going on in China, maybe we should lock them out of the world for a little bit and see what's going on. They weren't doing any of that. They were chasing after Donald Trump. I love Thomas Jefferson. You've heard me say that a bunch of times. He was a member of the original committee for the design of the Great Seal of the United States. And I want you to hear his proposal. I didn't know about this. I learned this recently. I was really blessed to hear it. He suggested a depiction of Moses standing on the shore and extending his hand over the sea, causing the sea to come back and kill all of the soldiers that Pharaoh sent. And he wanted Moses to have a crown on his head and a sword in his hand. And he wanted rays from a pillar of fire in the clouds reaching out to Moses to express that this was a command by God. Now, why was that important? Because those armies were the armies sent by Pharaoh. What he was doing was he was standing against his government. That's what he was doing, as God had ordered. And the insignia that he had to encircle it was rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. I want you to understand that that is absolutely important. But Pastor, how bad do you think these guys really are? Is anybody capable of standing up to them? Well, I want to take a look at a gentleman named Juan Damaris who's doing just that.
So it's my understanding up until now you have been, cutting hair. I think how you told our producers was under the table. You're opening all of your shops tomorrow. You are openly defying the state's orders to stay home. Tell me why.
I am. Well, there's a couple reasons why. I mean, I have a family. I've invested a lot of money in these 3 shops in the last 3 years, and I feel like it's a California constitutional right as well as America's constitutional right for me to pursue my life. And I mean, it's pretty clear. And we're just ready to get back to work, and that's what we're going to do. No one's going to bail us out, and my barber's livelihoods as well as my own livelihood is at stake here.
And your barbers, everybody's on the same page? They're okay with this? They want you to reopen as well?
Absolutely. I mean, they're hurting a lot more than I am. They're all young men, and they have young families and young ladies that work with me, and we're just ready to get back and get to work and open the state and fix this economy. Well, listen, I'm not going to live in fear. It's not American. I'm a Marine. I was a law enforcement officer for over a decade.
And we're grateful to you for your service.
Right, and then so anyone who's going to tell me to walk away from my huge investment and
no one's telling you to walk away, Juan. I'm just offering a different perspective.
Well, that's exactly what they're telling me. They actually are telling me to walk away. They're saying that
Who's
for
the
6
they?
months, possibly, the government, Governor Newsom, he's telling us that we're third phase, which let's just pretend that we're going to open on June 1st, which we're probably not. That means we're up to 45 days after we open, going to be allowed to enter our shops. That's going to be 6 months plus that I have to pay my landlords, that I have to pay my PG&E, that I have to pay my water. I paid my city licenses to work. So you're telling me to invest in an opportunity that I made for myself, but not be able to work and return that investment. And that's just not unacceptable.
Listen, I hear you loud and clear, Juan, and I also know that you're not alone. You're not the only small business owner who wants to reopen, right? I mean, I'm sure you have friends. I'm sure you have small business owner friends. Are they saying the same thing as you are?
Absolutely, more than not. Now, this great thing that gets to drive this pandemic is fear, and so there are a lot of the people that I talk to are fearful. They're fearful of getting these citations. They're fearful, but I'd rather get citations, do as much as I can, work and hustle, not ask the government for a single penny. And if I flop, I'd rather flop working than flop just sitting there, letting them take away my rights, take away my businesses, and take away the legacy that I'm going to leave my children.
He was in the military. He was a police officer. He knows exactly what he's doing. He understands exactly what they're doing, and he knows that they cannot do it. Remember I said last week, when the people fear the government, they have tyranny. When the government fears the people, they have liberty. We have let the paradigm shift in the wrong direction. But he's not the only one who's standing strong in the face of tyranny. I want you to meet this restaurateur from Maine.
The state of Maine has one of this country's least severe coronavirus outbreaks. So far, a total of only 53 people have died. As of Tuesday, according to the state's health department, there were a grand total of 33 people in the state in hospitals with coronavirus. That's out of a population of 1.3 million people. And according to new information flowing in from scientists around the world, we can be confident the state will not collapse if it does open back up. And that would be a pretty good idea at this point, since 1 in every 7 people in the state of Maine is now unemployed. That's all thanks to Governor Janet Mills, who doesn't care at all. She's just ordered the state to remain closed indefinitely. Rick Savage has had enough of this. He owns a restaurant in Bethel, Maine. He says he's opening up tomorrow, and he's daring the state to stop him. Rick Savage joins us tonight. Rick, good to have you on.
Thank you, Tucker.
I should just say at the outset that during the course of this last couple of months, you gave away over 10,000 meals to people in your community for free, so it's not like you're not engaged with the people around you. You are. You're planning to open up tomorrow. That's illegal in the state of Maine. Why are you doing it? What do you think will happen?
Well, the order originally started, it was May 1st, so we were gearing up for that. We did what we were supposed to do. We closed for 6 weeks. We cooked for the community. We went right through our whole restaurant, remodeled it, cleaned it, and it's time to open back up. We've gone throughout other parts of Maine. People are everywhere. I've got a restaurant that seats 250 people inside, a deck that seats 100, a 2,200 square foot patio. So I could put people at 6 foot space in everywhere and get open back up for business. So if each person does that in the state of Maine and tailors their business for what works, and people feel comfortable coming in, come in. If they don't feel comfortable, call us and we'll deliver it to your car. If you want to go sit on the deck, sit on the deck. You know, we've tried to call the governor. You can't even get a hold of them. The lawmakers are left in the dark, both Republicans and Democrats. She's doing this all rogue on her own. So we've had enough of it. We're encouraging all businesses in Maine to open up. We should have never been shut down in the first place. We need to open back up, get this summer tourist business going, or we're going to lose a third of our restaurants. Who knows how many motels and other businesses. So we're advocating for everybody, not just for my restaurant. It's time to go back to work. If people don't want to go out, quarantine yourself.
It's very simple. I don't need you to take care of me. We're big boys. We're big girls. We do not need the government to take care of us. What do they call that? The nanny state? The nanny state has gone to absolute tyranny because the nanny state implies we'll take care of you. Tyranny says we'll punish you when you don't do what we say. But it's not just business owners and it's not just pastors. Well, not too many pastors. It's not just people who are speaking out. I want you to hear the mayor of Newport Beach, California.
Neil is the mayor of Newport Beach, California. He's not obeying, or at least denouncing, Gavin Newsom's order to close the beaches in Southern California. He says it's unreasonable and against science. Mayor Neal joins us tonight. Mr. Mayor, thanks so much for coming on. So,
thank you, Tucker.
As I understand it, from the other coast, your governor has said, people have told me with advanced science degrees that beaches in Orange County should be closed and you must do it now. What's your reaction to this?
Yesterday, Governor Gavin Newsom closed 43 miles of Orange County beaches, not because of data, but because of politics. And how do I know that? Because here's the data. Orange County has 3.2 million people who live here. It's bigger than 22 states, bigger than states like Nevada, Mississippi, Iowa. And of all of those people, we've lost 50 people to this virus. That's 0.001% of our population. In our local hospital, we have 475 beds. They have never treated more than 25 people at any given time. And yesterday, they had 9 people they were treating, and only 1% of their ventilators were being used. And this beach closure idea to keep people safe, it's been tried in Los Angeles County. They have closed their beaches up there for over 30 days now, and the results just haven't borne out. Every single city that is along the coast in Los Angeles has a higher per capita COVID rate than every open beach community in Orange County. And let's talk about San Diego for just a second. They've got over 2 times the number of people who have died because of this virus than Orange County, but their beaches are open. This has nothing to do with data, and it has everything to do with politics. And I agree. I think what our governor did was he looked at photographs that were showing a mile of beach condensed into about a meter. It looked like everyone was on top of each other. But he should have called me. I'm the mayor of Newport Beach, and he should have asked me what we were seeing on the ground. And I would have told him. Our police chief, our fire chief, our lifeguards, even our local sheriffs all said universally, the vast majority of people, they were families on the beach. They were social distancing. But of course, there were people who weren't. So they got to spend some time talking to our law enforcement about making sure they understood what social distancing really means. Our governor should have fought beside us. He should have fought against this national narrative. Instead, the first time we heard from our governor was yesterday, last night, when he had someone from his office call us and tell us, your beaches are closed.
So he has no problem ignoring federal immigration law. Do you think that he'll enforce this order? If you kept your beaches open, what do you think would happen?
Well, our local sheriff has already said he has no intention of enforcing this. And so the question at that point is, what will the governor do? And I'll tell you, Tucker, I have to say, my dad has given me some great advice. He's one of my heroes. He's a former police officer. He's a retired federal judge, and I've talked to him about policy a number of times. And recently he told me, look, if it's a close call, you always go on the side of liberty, not restrictions. I don't think this should have been a close call for the governor, but if it was, no. I really hope he'll take my dad's advice to heart and reverse this call.
I hope so too. Mayor Neal, thanks so much for explaining that so calmly and reasonably, thoughtfully. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tucker.
Now, Mayor Neal made a point that most of you probably missed. And when Tucker Carlson asked him, what would he do, what would the governor do if he defies, keeps the beaches open? The mayor's response was, well, the sheriff has already said he won't enforce that. Now, why is that important? Because then he said, well, what's the governor going to do? That's important for a reason, because you might step back, you might think, well, I guess if he doesn't do that, then the governor could send the state police in there, or maybe he could even go so far, he'd go so far as to send the National Guard in there. God help him if he does such a thing. That would be such a crazy overreach. I think he'd probably invoke ire he would not dare to invoke. But why is it important when the mayor says that the sheriff's not going to enforce it? Because the sheriff in every county in the United States is the highest ranking law official. The sheriff has the authority to tell the FBI, get out of my county. The sheriff is the highest ranking law official in every county that there is a sheriff, period. Which is why there's a big move to get rid of sheriffs, by the way. Okay? They're very important, very, very important. Excuse me. And the mayor understands that. Now, back to our founding fathers, there was a great pastor at the time, Pastor Rutherford, and he understood about resistance to tyranny. See, they lived under tyranny. That's why they understood it so clearly. And he said this, he said, truth to Christ cannot be treason to Caesar. Period. Period, end discussion. It is not treason if we stand against a tyrannical government, period. That is not treason. Treason is what they are doing when they operate outside of the bounds of the laws that they're obligated to. How far are they willing to go? Let's take a look at another video. This is stuff that's happening. I'm not talking about stuff that might happen. Look at what's happening this week here in the United States.
Very useful in moments like this to have an independent media. News organizations exist to hold the powerful to account. Here we have the powerful acting with no accountability at all. And our news media, they are cheering it on, besotted fangirls. No abuse is too grotesque for them. No talking point is too stupid to repeat. Reporters will do whatever they are told. They are all in. MSNBC recently sent a camera crew to document one of the latest and most Orwellian developments in America's descent into Chinese-style social control, barking drones that harangue citizens from the air. MSNBC was delighted by it.
Please go away from each other and separate. Elizabeth, New Jersey is now using drones to spread the life-saving message. You are not immune to this virus.
Move away from each other, commands the state of New Jersey. Break it up! Your God-given right to free assembly has been suspended indefinitely. Back inside, proles, or you will face the consequences. MSNBC applauds this as if it's all completely normal. In fact, it is, they tell us, a life-saving message. Handmaidens to the corona security state. But to their credit, at least MSNBC put it on television. Most outlets don't even bother to cover stories like this. The other day, prosecutors in New Jersey charged 9 people for daring to participate in a Jewish wedding in their backyard. A few months ago, that would have made the news. For 250 years, Americans have enjoyed the unfettered right to practice their faith as they choose. Now they don't. It happened overnight. Last month, Christians across the country were legally prohibited from celebrating Easter in their own churches. The national media barely noted it. How exactly is this happening? Well, it turns out that's not clear. Strangely, not very many people have asked. Politicians have no right to do any of this. They cannot make it illegal for people to go to religious services. The Constitution of the United States expressly prohibits that. The words could not be clearer. The First Amendment explicitly prevents government from making any law that inhibits the exercise of religious faith. That's not a detail or a footnote. It is a cornerstone of our history and of our legal system. Millions of people, probably your ancestors, fled to this country from around the world precisely because our Bill of Rights gave them this guarantee. It's why this country was founded. And in a moment, it's gone. How? Where did politicians get the authority to do this? Because some elderly, power-drunk epidemiologist told them to do it? That's not how our system works. It can't work that way. Occasionally, you hear someone complain about this. Some lonely civil libertarian will fret that we may be on a slippery slope toward losing our rights. If only. We're already there. We've slid to the bottom of that slope. Our rights are gone. No one has explained how politicians are allowed to do this. Where's the authority come from? How can they override the Constitution? Nobody seems to care. They're too afraid. But if you think this moment is scary, consider what might come next. Now that we've ceded all authority in the country to our political leaders, what can't they do? What are the limits to their power? That's not a theoretical question. It's not an argument over philosophy or political theory. It is the most practical possible question. The answer will define where this country goes next. What can't politicians do in the name of public health? As it stands, politicians won't let people worship or work or go to school or see their aging parents. They place the nation under house arrest. That's happening today, right now. But let's say we all get more afraid. What then? What couldn't they start doing? Could they intern people? Seriously. You can dismiss the possibility of that if you like, but remember that just a few months ago, most of us would have dismissed as ludicrous the possibility that propaganda-spewing drones would be hovering above. Now we have them. So what's next? What can't they do?
Very, very, very real things. I've been saying this for a long time. You've heard me say it. I'm surprised to know that Tucker Carlson is as on board with this understanding as he is. I've always thought he did a good job. I'm very surprised to hear him realizing and saying these things. I'm very happy he is. Where will they go? The answer is we have given them carte blanche to go any place they want. Now is the time for pushback, or you're not going to like what happens. There exist all over the United States FEMA camps. Some of them will hold as many as 100-something thousand people. I think one 350,000 people. And people are nodding their heads here because they've seen them and they know. They'll deny they exist, but they do exist. I've got photographs and videos of them. People have died getting those photos and videos. I have them. They exist. They're real. Why are they there? Why do they have FEMA camps in the middle of nowhere that hold hundreds of thousands of people, that have ankle bracelets or ankle chains to cement you to the floor? Why? What in the world was going on? Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who wrote the Gulag Archipelago, said when they were building these prisons, the gulags in the Soviet Union, people said, well, where are they going to get all the prisoners for these things? Little did they know they were going to be the prisoners. And Solzhenitsyn, who we hailed as a hero here in this country when he came here in the 80s, Ronald Reagan let him come here. He lived up in Maine, if I remember, Vermont or Maine. And we hailed him as a hero. And in his book, The Gulag Archipelago, he said, we laid together on our bunks. Well, let me back up a step. He said, when the police came to arrest us, we knew it wasn't right. They had no right to. They had no reason to. The soldiers knew that there was no right to and no reason to, and they couldn't be doing it. But we all went along to get along, and we said, well, it'll all work out, I guess. And you could see in the soldiers' eyes, I guess it's going to be okay, but it wasn't okay. And they imprisoned everybody. And he said then, a year later, when they were all laying on their bunks, crowded 6 people to a bunk in these cold prisons, these cold camps, he said, we used to lament that we did not kill the soldiers the first night that they came, because everyone knew that there was no reason for it. He said, and they all said this, he said it in his book, he said, if we had done that, they would have lost the will to come and do it because they all knew it was wrong anyway, and it never would have happened. That's Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Now, some of you don't know him or don't remember him. He is one of the champions of freedom, and we hailed him as such, and his books are classics. Understand what we're facing right now. Understand where it is. They go one more step. These camps exist already. They don't exist for no reason. Don't get on those buses. Don't get on those cattle cars. It's not for your own good. I've said that a bunch of times. I mean it again. And I'm sharing mostly to adults, but we have some kids in the room, and I want to tell the kids that this next video is for them. Because you guys all think, well, this is just grown-up stuff, it doesn't matter to me, but it matters to you, and you're going to see why as you watch this next video.
You may have seen this tape already. If not, you've likely seen many more like it in the past few weeks. 2 armed officers arrive at a family's home in Wisconsin. Someone has reported the mother to police for arranging a play date for her daughter. That's now a crime. Here's what happened next.
Are you aware that we're in a stay-at-home order right now?
Yeah, obviously.
By the government?
Yes, I am aware.
Okay, you're aware of that?
I am aware.
So I don't need to explain that to you?
Why are you here?
Because your daughter is going to play at other people's home and you're allowing it to happen. Stop having your kid go by other people's home.
Are we done here?
No, we're not.
Okay.
Your middle initial and your last name.
I'm not giving it to you. I haven't done anything wrong.
Okay. Perfect. We got it.
Okay.
And that'll be documented too, that you're uncooperative.
You were uncooperative. That will be documented. Notice the tone they strike with this mother. They are standing on her property, uninvited, hectoring her about the so-called crime of allowing her daughter to play outside the house. They're not apologizing for this. They're not embarrassed to be carrying out an order that has no basis in science. They are utterly self-confident. They treat her with pure contempt like a peasant. And later, the Calumet County Sheriff's Department posted an account of what happened on their Facebook page. In it, they refer to that mother's mobile home 6 times. Just, she lives in a mobile home. Oh, just a prole, just a peasant. Shut up and obey. Who cares what she thinks? They believe they have the right to do that. The question is, where exactly do they get that right? That's a good question. It's a question that we are strongly discouraged from asking. The short answer is governors told them they could. Never in American history have politicians been more powerful than they are now. Effectively, they are gods. In the state of Maine, for example, Governor Janet Mills now has the power.
Our forefathers understood something. They were very patriotic citizens, and they courageously stood on the Word of God, and they knew that they could not surrender to tyrants. And I want to tell you that is a message for us today as well. We cannot surrender. And it's not just government officials that are out of control. I want you to listen to this businessman, well-to-do businessman.
Know that along the way, Walker internalized a lot of the attitudes of China's totalitarian government. During our interview, we asked Walker what he thought of China's lockdowns. Here's what he said. Now, credible reports suggest that Chinese authorities locked people in their apartments and left them to die. We know they snatched people off the street and threw them into police vans. God knows where they went. That's the quarantine that you think they deserve high praise for. Why?
Well, I think, Tucker, if you just look at the results, okay, so I know there's always going to be questions about exactly what the numbers are, but I think the harsh action that they took, given the scale of China and the number of big cities in it, was exactly what they needed to do to be able to prevent the outbreak from going any further. And the reality is the outbreak hasn't gone much beyond Wuhan.
So the secret police kidnapping citizens off the street, authorities locking people in their apartments from the outside until they starved to death. Just look at the results. All of that, Walker said, was, quote, exactly what they needed to do. This is the view of one of America's most prominent business leaders. He did not seem ashamed to say it. In fact, later in our interview, Walker suggested that American authorities could have done the same things in New York if only they'd gotten an earlier start. Kind of a shame they didn't. Your jaw dropped watching it. But here's the striking thing. Nobody seemed to notice that he said it. Walker didn't find himself on the front page of the New York Times the next morning. No one in American business denounced him. He went home to bed, and that was it. Totalitarianism does not shock us anymore.
Not a good testimony. Not a good sign of what's going on. In 1773, the men of Marlborough, Connecticut got together, and they made this very famous proclamation. None of you have probably ever heard it, but listen to what they said. Death is more eligible than slavery. A freeborn people are not required by the religion of Jesus Christ to submit to tyranny. We implore the ruler above the skies that he would bear his arm in defense of his church and his people and let Israel go. Now I want to just show you how much things are changing, as if these videos are not enough. I want you to listen to the despotic governor of the state of Illinois last week.
Pritzker is the governor of Illinois. On Monday, Pritzker did his best to explain why his word is now law in the state. It has to be law, he explained. Otherwise, thousands would die.
The stay-at-home order has prevented tens of thousands of illnesses and thousands of deaths. History will remember those who put politics aside to come together to keep people safe. It will also remember those who so blindly devoted to ideology and the pursuit of personal celebrity that they made an enemy of science and of reason.
In 3 sentences, Governor Pritzker framed himself as a leader of historic stature. Those who doubt his decrees are, quote, enemies of science and reason, enemies of civilization itself, enemies of the state. 2 days later, on Wednesday, this Wednesday, it emerged that Pritzker's own wife, who has her own state employees, was one of these people. His wife apparently had violated the lockdown herself. Governor Pritzker was asked about this. Here's how he responded.
What is your response to people who say the stay-at-home order and non-essential travel bans aren't being abided by your family? I believe there's a report from Illinois Rising Action that says that she recently traveled to Florida.
Well, first of all, I want to say that in politics, it used to be that we kept our families out of it. You know, my official duties have nothing to do with my family. So I'm just not going to answer that question. It's inappropriate, and I find it reprehensible, honestly, that that reporter wrote a story about it.
Yeah, how dare someone cover that? Asking about whether or not J.B. Pritzker's own family is obeying the order that your family is morally obligated to follow is, quote, inappropriate. Indeed, the governor says it is reprehensible. How dare you? In Maine, for example, Governor Janet Mills now has the power to suspend any law she doesn't like. She can seize any state resource she feels like seizing. She can force any citizen or all citizens from their home. She can do all of this for as long as she wants, as long as she believes Maine is in a state of emergency. In fact, there's virtually nothing that Janet Mills can't now do. Many governors now have these powers.
Absolutely out of control, and it will get much worse. There has to be pushback. Today, that pushback has to come from the pulpits, just like it did in 1776. And preachers are only teaching the precepts of men as doctrines. They're instructing their flocks to neglect the commandments of God and to submit to the decrees of ungodly tyrants. And I'm telling you right now, pastors, every one of you will give account to God for that. You are wrong. That is not what we as pastors are supposed to do. I'm going to bring this to a close. I want to introduce you to someone, a wonderful, wonderful guy. His name is Pastor Samuel West. And Pastor West was born in Massachusetts, down on Cape Cod in Yarmouth in 1730. And he graduated from Harvard University, Harvard College at the time, actually. And he was a classmate of John Hancock, whom we all know who John Hancock was, you know. He's a big signer of the Declaration of Independence. The king won't need his specs to see my signature. He wrote it so big. And he was a member of the convention that formed the Constitution of Massachusetts, and he was a delegate to the Constitutional Convention to ratify the Constitution for the United States of America. And he was known as one of the finest, had one of the finest theological minds in the colonies in that time. And he constantly affirmed the right of Christian men to resist tyrannical rulers, even to the point of armed rebellion, to protect their God-given rights. I want you to understand these pastors from the Revolution understood what the gospel was all about. As a matter of fact, he got very involved in the Patriot movement at the time, and there was a spy in the Sons of Liberty meetings, and it was causing great problems. And he was the one who actually figured out who it was. It was a turning point in the whole revolution. And on May 29th, 1776, he was asked to preach before the House of Representatives in Massachusetts, and he preached an election sermon, they called it. And he gave the true principles of government. You go to the next slide there. He gave the true principles of government, the magistrate's authority, how limited it is, and how arbitrary power is subversive to the design of civil polity. Obedience to the will of God is supreme. He said this. I want you to listen to it. I'll clean it up because sometimes the Old English is a little confusing. He said Christians are, he said this, that Romans 13 does not require Christians to submit to tyranny. He said, indeed, Christians are obligated to resist tyranny. As our duty of obedience to the magistrate is founded upon our obligation to promote the general good, our readiness to obey lawful authority will always arise in proportion to the love and regard that we have for the welfare of the public. And the same love and regard for the public will inspire us with as strong a zeal to oppose tyranny as we have to obey magistracy. Our obligation to promote the public good extends as much to opposing every exertion of arbitrary power that injures as it does to submitting to good and wholesome laws. No man, therefore, can be a good member of the community that is not as zealous to oppose tyranny as he is ready to obey magistracy. A slavish submission to tyranny is a proof of a very sordid and base mind. Tyrants are not magistrates. Whenever magistrates abuse their power and authority, they immediately cease. Their authority immediately ceases, and it becomes not only lawful, but an indispensable duty to oppose them. The affection and duty that we owe our country and the obedience we owe to God all require us to resist and oppose tyranny. These guys understood. If Jesus was only a future king, leaders of that day would have probably opposed him. But they understood who he was. He's the reigning king, and he was the one who deserved allegiance. The prophecies regarding his birth, even Isaiah said it. And Isaiah, you don't have to turn to it. I'll just read it quickly because you know the verse. Isaiah chapter 9 says this, "The people that walk in darkness have seen a great light. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them has the light shined. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. And his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there shall be no end. Upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice, from henceforth even forevermore." It's no wonder the authorities were afraid of Paul. One of the men I have great respect for in this country, I'll close with this video, is Judge Napolitano. I want you to hear what he said. Very, very powerful. He understands the Constitution.
Now by Fox's senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano, a legitimate expert on the Bill of Rights. Judge, thanks so much for coming on. So I'm sorry to be fixated on this one question because I can't get it out of my mind. Is it possible in this country, under our system, the one we've lived under for 250 years, for a politician to say, I'm just not obeying the Constitution, explicit rights guaranteed there, and I'm going to take them away? How is that allowed?
Well, it will be allowed if the politician believes he can get away with it because the public accepts the illusion of safety rather than the idea of liberty, for which many of our wars have been fought and many of our forebears have died in order to preserve the liberties, which now have been taken away by these politicians because they think they know what's better for us than we know for ourselves. They're not interested in choice. They're not interested in the Bill of Rights. They're not interested in their oath to uphold the Bill of Rights. Tucker, the constitutional guarantees free speech, free press, the right to assemble, the right to worship are only as good as the human beings in whose hands we have reposed the Constitution for safekeeping.
That's right.
And the governors that you have referred to in Maine, in New Jersey, in Illinois, in California have no regard for the Constitution because they have public sentiment behind them, because they've scared the daylight out of the public, and very few people, unlike the mayor, God bless him, he's willing to do this, are willing to stand up and say, enough.
Then may I ask you a question? If our politicians have no regard for the Bill of Rights, upon which the country is founded, of course, then why should the rest of us have any regard for their orders? I mean, it's not their country. They don't own it. It's our country. So why are we obeying them if they're contravening our Bill of Rights?
We have no obligation to obey them. Governors don't write the law and don't assess punishments. Only legislatures do. Every single one of the 50 governors in this state, in this country, has written new laws and assessed new punishment utterly and totally without authority to do so. Even if the state legislatures of the states of which they're the governors had authorized them to do it, that legislation would be invalid because, as you have pointed out, it directly contravenes guarantees in the Bill of Rights. And every one of those governors, when they became governor, took an oath not only to their state law and their state constitutions, but to the federal constitution as well, which includes the Bill of Rights. They have forgotten it. They have looked the other way. They are just interested in telling people how to live because they can get away with it. It will take a determined minority, like the mayor of Newport Beach, like some of the people that you and I know, pushing hard to point out how they're violating what we have hired them to do, because the majority is willing to accept this nonsense and believes it's the law. I go into a supermarket to buy a newspaper. The sign says, it's the law. You can't come in here without a mask. I said to the owner, you can tell me I have to wear a mask because you own this business. And if you think my not wearing a mask will harm your business, you have the right to keep me out. But there is no law that says I have to wear the mask. There's just the governor's musings and whims. That's all it is.
I can't control myself. I've got to say shame on many of our religious leaders for following these illegitimate orders and taking their orders from the government. That's not what they should be doing, for sure. Judge Napolitano, great to see you tonight. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Tucker understood it. Pastors should not be capitulating to this whatsoever. We have not, we will not. And those people need to understand something. That Constitution that they're disregarding, that is the thing that gives them the authority and gives them that office. You don't just eviscerate that Constitution and remain in office. That's how you got in office, was because of that Constitution that you're now trashing. No, you don't have the authority to do that. And they say, well, we're all in the same boat together. No, we're not all in the same boat together. We might all be in the same storm together, but we're definitely not all in the same boat together. Absolutely not. And I'm not wearing a mask. I refuse to wear a mask. You're going to have a $1,000 fine. Great. Injure me. Go ahead. And in the meantime, if at any point I really need to go someplace and need to have a mask, yep, this is the mask. His name was Guy Fawkes, and he resisted tyranny as well. He attempted to blow up Parliament in England, 15 whatever the year was. And he didn't pull it off, but it's a very famous attempt. And this mask, his face, has come to mean resisting tyranny. And that's what I'm going to have with me. Oh, you need a mask? Here I am. I want you all to consider that. It's important. We bought a case of them. Anyway, that's all I have to say at the moment. We'll talk some more about our foundations next week. Amen.
My one desire is to